So we've started recording. All right. Well, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this discussion today on I believe it's the fourth day of the conference, the sixth annual Law Enforcement and Public Health Conference. Today's session is under the name of Law Enforcement and Harm Reduction for Illicit Use. I'm very happy to join four incredible leaders who've been working on law enforcement and harm reduction for decades. I was tempted to do that thing where you add up all the years of work in order to show the collective experience, but I thought better of that. And then in my thought process of that, I then realized I think a hidden secret to harm reduction is that it helps keep you young. It's maybe part of the fountain of youth, despite our growing age. But in recognition of this collective wealth of experience and insights, we thought that today, rather than doing a harm reduction 101 or a series of presentations, we wanted to try to facilitate a conversation and a conversation style approach. Although I'm very much inspired and love Oprah, I will immediately admit that I will fall far, far, far short from that standard, but we'll try my best. We've identified a few key areas of interest that we want to discuss and dig into. I've set a number of questions already for our panelists to address a number of topics related to obstacles and challenges, harm reduction as a tool for broader police reform, innovation, piloting and scale, international transferability, decriminalization, changing public health and public safety response that we hope to dig into. But we won't be able to cover everything because there's obviously a rich and multiple topics that we can discuss. But with the conversation idea in mind, we welcome everybody in the audience today to please share your comments in the chat. You could put questions in the chat or in the Q&A as well for all the panelists, and I'll do my best to monitor that and bring in any of your questions or responses for our panelists to respond to. Introductions. My name is Mark Krapansky. I'm a senior program officer with the Open Society Foundation's Public Health Program. I've led a global portfolio there on law enforcement, community safety, and public health, with an emphasis on harm reduction, drug use and drug markets, and sex work. My work has involved supporting local and national initiatives in 12 countries to advance non-punitive and non-abstinence-based approaches to drugs, health, and safety. I'm joined by Dr. Hai Luong, who's graduated from Bachelor of Law with focusing on criminal investigation, and spent over 15 years in law enforcement agencies, both with lecturing and practicing activities. His areas of interest are particular focus on the death penalty in Vietnam, transnational organized crime in Asia, drug trafficking, smuggling of migrants, harm reduction, policing, and police training. At the current time, Dr. Hai holds an associate research fellowship at the Social and Global Studies Center at RMIT University. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Hai. Jason Q is now in his final year of his policing career. He told me before we started 8 months to go. So the final stretch. In his policing career, he's worked in both uniform and as a detective in each rank to chief inspector within frontline, CID, major crime, and intelligence policing teams. JQ is a humanist, he's a compassionate, social justice-oriented person and police officer, having prioritized drug-related deaths, homicide, or homelessness, and vulnerability in the design of the Thames Valley award-winning drug diversion scheme. JQ is driven to reduce the stigma of addiction and drug use, implementing schemes in schools to preclude exclusions and enable everyone found with drugs a non-judgmental assessment about their use and tailored education and harm reduction to reduce risk. We're also joined by Chief Brendan Cox, who is the Director of Policing Strategies at the LEAD National Support Bureau, where he provides strategic guidance on the implementation of LEAD, the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion, and Let Everyone Advance with Dignity, to jurisdictions around the world. Brendan was previously employed with the Albany, New York Police Department, where he retired as Chief of Police in 2017. So maybe Jason, you and Brendan can definitely connect on that transition. In 2016, under Brendan's leadership, the Albany Police Department was recognized by the Department of Justice as one of the top 15 police departments in the country as part of the COPS Advancing 21st Century Policing Initiative. And last and certainly not least, we are joined by Janat Kosmukhamedova, a PhD in biochemistry, is the head of the UNODC Regional Program Office for Eastern Europe, the EECA Regional Advisor in the areas of drugs and HIV, and a global focal point for law enforcement in HIV. Before joining the United Nations in 1997, she was involved in the research and lecturing activities, focusing on the areas related to occupational health and clinical biology. Thank you all very much for joining us. I know many of you have seen also Mukta Sharma was intended to join, but unfortunately has Wi-Fi connection issues where she is and is unable to make it today. So let's kick things off. As a opening kind of round of questions, just want to pose this for each of you. You know, you each have a unique and long and valuable journey in your work related to policing and harm reduction. And would just love to hear from you to please share how you came to know and engage with harm reduction in your work, and what does that term mean to you? Jason, I see you eager and ready to go. If you want to kick that off.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, to be honest, like the majority of police officers, I think, you know, your career spans an awful long time, but in that time, your work touches the lives of so many different people, and you know, every contact leaves a trace. I've heard that low card theory of you know, and it's absolutely true. You know, we do, and but essentially where I don't want to be emotive about this, but it's hard not to be, because in policing you see people in their darkest hour of need, you know, in most cases. And I think none more so than just patrolling as a police constable all of those years ago, you know, talking to people living on cardboard, you know, with a whole host of vulnerabilities that society excludes them from all forms of help, or from integration, or otherwise. And I think it's listening to those people who have absolutely nothing, and it's listening and talking and listening again and listening again and again and again to their stories, their trauma, and their reasons for being where they are. And I think you can't help but be compelled to help. And whereas it's easy for a police officer to stick with the status quo, to keep doing what they're trained to do, which is the easy thing, you know, we apply the law. It's easy to blindly, robotically do that time again, but is it actually doing any good? Or do you look deeper and then actually see the damage that's actually doing, the unintended consequences? I think for me, you know, I'm a passionate advocate and designer of diversion, or deflection, or depenalization, however which way you want to term these schemes. But they all center around applying a public health approach to the actual issue. You know, finding someone in possession of drugs who lives on cardboard, that's not about fun. That's not about choice. That's about need and trauma and understanding. And it's understanding what's beneath that person's life that needs to be helped or supported, or, you know, navigated in some way or another. But yeah, so that's what motivates me. It's looking at people who need us, not you know, applying robotically, blindingly, an idealistic policy or law. I can go on all day about that, Mark, but I'm very passionate about that.
Definitely. And many of the points you raised, Jason, thanks. We're going to try to pick up. I'm going to go around as I see on the screen. Hi, if you would like to take this next in terms of how you came to know and engage with harm reduction in your work, and what does that mean for you?
Thank you so much, Mark. And perhaps now it's a good evening, because now I'm here in Melbourne, nearly 12 a.m. Yeah, I would like to thank so much to enjoy this panel, and I want to share where I come. It's basically it's from Vietnam. Basically, I'm not involved harm reduction until Vietnam decriminalized drug use 2009. Even though I involved police uniform since 1999, but the whole for 5 years in the police training, to be honest, we never heard or we never know nothing in the harm reduction, particularly with the policy. It is true story. And before I moving in criminal investigation faculty in Hanoi, at least 3 my good friends he dead by the injected drug use. It's very short stories, and I asked myself what's happened and how the police can involve or help or the inter with the drug use in my country. It's really long story in the Vietnam, the end of 1990s, even those early or middle 2010s. And after I studied my master in University of Wollongong, it's the first trip in Australia. I asked myself what should be changed in the policy, particularly with the policing and police response in my country. Still, even though that 2010, but nothing in the definition or the conceptualized in the harm reduction or policing and harm reduction in the police force. It's friendly. And after that, I come back to Melbourne. It's 2013, go to my PhD journey until 2017. And I'm quite lucky meet and discuss really the passionate harm reduction. For example, Professor Nick Cross or the Oker van Kik is the Netherlands police, and also Melissa Zadai, who is I think is the first police women focusing on the Vietnam women police. I'm very happy. Hopefully, it's her book coming soon. And also my colleague now in the University of Melbourne, Dr. Nicholas Thompson. Unfortunately, I think he's not involved with it. Yeah, it's quite a little bit long, the story, why I involved the harm reduction, why I want to bridge in my current background policing with the harm reduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And some of the points you raised, I'm going to pick up later, particularly around the relationship on harm reduction and decriminalization. I know that's something that we all have many good debates and discussions on. So I'd love to hear from you on that later. Janat, would you like to go next?
Yes, hello, hello, nice to meet you all here, and thank you very much for this question. Actually, I started with this topic immediately when I joined UN family. I started with UNAIDS in Kazakhstan, and it was awareness campaign on HIV and harm reduction services among people who use drugs, sex workers and their partners, truck drivers, and MSM group. So the phenomenon of harm reduction actually came first to me at that age, probably at that time, and probably I was not very much deeply familiar with this topic, but since 1997, it became just the important part of my daily work. and actually alive, because it's absolutely goes along with all what UNODC is doing. And in fact, all these topics related to harm reduction very much grounded in justice area and human rights area, and focus very much on positive changes in the people's life, and also without judgment, and based on the free on the human rights and free choices. That is very important for our organization, for my daily work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Brendan, rounding us out on this first question.
Yeah, my first interaction with harm reduction was really kind of being in the right place at the right time. 2007, 2008, syringe exchange was starting to expand in New York State and kind of came upstate to Albany. And I was on a board of directors for a community-based organization that did work with domestic violence and youth programs. And at the time, I was running investigations for the police department. And the folks that were looking to start the syringe exchange program came in to do a presentation at the board of directors meeting. And they were having a hard time getting any engagement from the city, from city government. Of course, didn't want to meet with them. That included the police department and the mayor's office. And as they did their presentation, and when they were asked by the folks at the not-for-profit how they could help, one of the things that came up was, well, we were trying to get in with the city, and everybody pointed to me because, of course, I was the only government official at the table. So I wound up ultimately having a meeting with them with some of my staff, and we talked through what they were looking to do with a mobile van and where they were going to be in the city. And naive me sent a memo up the chain of command to my chief and said, hey, we should meet with these folks and we should really help them out. And my chief thankfully didn't go too crazy. He ultimately just called me in and said, go ahead and work with these folks, but you're doing this, on your own. Basically, this is not officially, just unofficially work with them and help them out. The mayor's office won't be meeting with them. We can't really officially give them the go, but you can work with them. So we started to work together, and they got the syringe exchange program up and running. And the benefits that I saw that, this is pre-overdose crisis. Not that people weren't overdosing and dying then, because they were, but this was really pre-pandemic epidemic issues. And the benefits we saw were really twofold. I mean, first and foremost, I saw that we weren't the experts when it came to the world of drug use, that, we didn't have the answers, that it made more sense to give people a safe supply of syringes, and also that outreach component that the folks from the syringe exchange did. But it was also an avenue for us to be able to communicate with people that could get information out to drug users that we could not. So, we were able to open a line of communication with the syringe exchange program when we did have an overdose, to be able to call them and say, hey, we just had an overdose. Here's where it happened. Back at that time, the dealers used to actually stamp the packaging of the heroin as pre-fentanyl. And we could say, it was stamped this is where we have information about where it was bought, and they could get information out to drug users and hopefully save some lives. And at the same time, they could call me and say, hey, we had an officer that was hanging out in the area where the van is. That's not helping us. Or we had an officer that stopped somebody, and, the word we got back from that individual is that the officer, gave them a hard time because they were part of the, syringe exchange program, and said they didn't care. So we were able to really open those lines of communication to better the services and to educate our officers better. And certainly, I'm not going to say that all the officers that work at the areas, the two different areas, appreciated the syringe exchange van being there, but the cooperation that we got from the provider was just great, because when somebody in the neighborhood called and had an issue, we were able to work through it. The one area that the van was working, which they needed to be, there was a school, so we were able to move them to a different area. They were very cooperative with that. And then, officer safety, they talked to folks that used syringes about when they got approached by an officer to tell an officer that, yeah, I have a syringe on me and I can carry a syringe, and here's why. New York State still has some wacky laws, and here's why. And our needle sticks went way down. So, I mean, there was a huge increase in officer safety. So it really just started to click. And I'll be honest, in 2007, 2008, if you asked me if that was harm reduction, I would have looked at you like, you know, you were coming from Mars, because I would have been like, I don't know what harm reduction is. I didn't realize at the time that's what we were doing. But as time moved through and as we expanded into starting law enforcement assisted diversion, all of a sudden it became clear that there was actually something to name that we were doing. And it all made sense, especially back to that, you know, in law enforcement, we're not experts when it comes to things. And I learned that over time. We're experts in certain parts of things. We're experts in certainly the law, but we're not experts when it comes to folks that are suffering trauma. We're not experts when it comes to folks suffering substance use disorders. We're not experts in a lot of social service issues and we need other partners. And to me, harm reduction talks partnership. It talks relationships. It talks, you know, taking things from a humanistic standpoint of taking away that stigma, that trauma, and really working things in a different way. I think it opens the door to those relationships. So, you know, I came about this in a roundabout different way, but you know, I was glad that I was sitting at that board meeting that night.
Awesome. Thank you, Brendan. There's something you said there that a thread I want to pick up on before returning to some of the more set questions I have. But, you know, you mentioned at the end, and you mentioned earlier about as a police officer, you said we aren't the experts on drug use. And that, I think, in sometimes is surprising to hear from police, right? And I think, you know, you've spoken about this before. We've heard, you know, often where many police officers have gotten maybe jaded or lost empathy, or you know, there's also this ideological push as well that the way you deal with it is you lock people up and put them away, right, and get them off the street. But this kind of acknowledgement, and I don't know if it's too strong of a word, but of a kind of vulnerability in a way, especially as a police officer, to say I'm not the expert in trauma or drug use, and to look for this partnership and expertise elsewhere seems pretty significant. So I want to pull that thread a little bit if anyone wants to pick up on that in terms of how to make that kind of transformation and even before transformation and introduction within police that might otherwise appear rigid or ready to solve every problem that, you know, is thrown at it. How to introduce that idea that there might be, you know, a different way of approaching these things through a partnership outside of the police and through a different approach.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say quickly, I don't want to take all the time, but I mean, you know, we come into this world of policing and are taught from early on that, you know, that the way to get people to cooperate is to arrest and punish, and that's going to rehabilitate folks. And if we look at the truth and we look at the actual research, we realize that does not work and coercion doesn't work, and that there are better ways to do things. So I think we just have to face that reality. I also think when it comes to this war on drugs, which is extremely unjust, that when we look back at it, it wasn't folks in the public safety sector that were saying to legislative bodies and to a president that, you know, that these are the things we need to do. And, you know, we have an audio tape of President Nixon saying exactly why the war on drugs at that point, not that there wasn't a war before then, needed to take place. And it was racist and to keep people down. So, I mean, when we look at the reality and of the situation, I think we can face that and we can stop actually trying to defend it as folks in policing and actually realize that we don't have to continue to be part of that. We can actually listen to other professionals. There are things where we are the professionals on and we are the experts, but, you know, we can't be the experts on everything. And it's okay to face that reality.
Thanks, Brendan. Jason, I saw you're going to come in.
Yeah, just to echo Brendan, really, and it's a brilliant point because you know, we aren't experts in everything. You know, particularly, you know, we're growing now into a whole system police service, if you know what I mean. It's, you know, we're relying on our partners more and more and more from public health to work with us to solve, you know, or to provide more realistic outcomes to a lot of crime types. You know, possession of drugs. I'll just give you an example. You know, the audience here will know this for sure, but you know, the wider public don't. That actually the law is there to deter possession of drugs. So that's why it's against the law to possess controlled drugs. But then, you know, when you have in the UK sense, 11% of the adult population consuming a controlled drug at least once a year, that's a significant number of people. And in fact, 20% of 16 to 24-year-olds consumed a controlled drug in the past year. That's 1.3 million young people. The law has already failed for those people being found in possession, and the police service can't police that number of, you know, that sheer quantity of people using drugs. But the state does have a degree of responsibility, and this is where health comes in, because like cigarettes, they're a lawful commodity. People smoke. The state has a duty to reduce harm, and through advertising and campaigns for healthier choices. And the same should apply to drugs. You know, I'm not saying here that I'm going to acquiesce or normalize drug use by being outspoken, apparently, and by saying, you know, I support full decriminalization. We absolutely need decriminalization. You know, it's not controversial to speak like that anymore. You know, the damage is plain to see through prohibition, and so we need to have these honest conversations and be evidenced as to what we're trying to achieve. But an idealistic law to prevent people from possessing drugs has already failed. It's time to move forward, and that's not being controversial. It's just being honest.
Thanks, Jason. Before moving on to the next question, Jonah, I'm curious if you wanted to come in on this, especially, you know, we were talking earlier about UNODC has created early on a handbook for law enforcement on these issues. You have a deep experience in terms of trying to engage law enforcement in different countries on this. I'm curious your thoughts on this question around maybe resistance or openness around a new approach among police.
Thank you very much. Interesting question, and I was actually wanted also to provide some probably insight on this topic, and I thank you very much, Brandon and Jason, for putting this in such a way. Yes, that's true. We've developed in 2013. We developed the training manual for law enforcement, particularly law enforcement on harm reduction services among people who use drugs. And we've done a lot of training session and sensitizing workshop to bring together law enforcement and civil society organizations. We've done it in 24 countries, as I said. It's high priority countries for UNODC, including, by the way, Vietnam. I've been there together with Greg Damon doing this workshop. What is interesting? Yeah, there is a huge level. I can't say that this is probably persistence or probably misunderstanding, because they always law enforcement. It's just opinion from my side. What I see, I'm not the law enforcement person. Probably there will be some objection from Brendan, but the first task which law enforcement put is just to protect the existing law. And if existing law has punitive character towards drug consumption and drug possession, of course, the actions, the behavior would be quite, I think, harmful towards people who use drugs and other key population. That is why when we started to talk with them, we always face some arguments, which actually based on their daily practices, and they also refer us to the local legislation. But after the training, of course, it's possible to change the mindset of those people who are participating in this workshop, because we try to put them together in discussion with key population group, with clients of OST program, with the service providers. And we managed to change their mindset, at least for after these 3 days. But what is the main problem? If these practices do not repeat regularly and do not upgrade their daily sort of knowledge, we will walk in vain. And that was actually the result of our activities in some countries. because we are sort of doing something, but it doesn't bring, it do not bring us to the police reform or legislation change. And here we face a lot of, I would say, obstacles there. It's a very long-term process, and in order to change it, you should work not only with police, you have to involve justice sector. We have involved judges there, all these prosecutors, we have involved investigators there. And sometimes, yeah, we also face in some countries some, how would say, not objection, but some unwillingness to change quickly from the health sector as well. And in some cases, civil society people, they're not ready to collaborate with law enforcement because they consider that it's better just to be invisible, to do the effective job and just do not put law enforcement in front of these services, just to avoid any further limitation or cutting the services. That is why it's a very, I would say, difficult question, which, and I'm really grateful to start this conversation and discussion here. It, again, bring us to some changes in law and legislation and bring us to importance of decriminalization. But decriminalization is also should be done in a very comprehensive way, because decriminalization sometimes bring us new challenges, like increased fines for drug possession, or inability to change this minimum dosage that is actually accepted in the legislation and identified as a low dosage for possession, something like this. So yeah, I don't know whether I sort of answered your question or probably put more questions.
Well, no, you definitely answered it very well. Thank you. No, and raised a lot of important questions. The decriminalization issue we will definitely get to, but I want to thank you as well for pointing out the fact I think we can often forget that police don't operate and law enforcement doesn't operate in a vacuum as well, and they're not the only actor. So oftentimes that narrow focus, and especially in certain jurisdictions where police discretion may be relatively limited, right? That we also need to engage with judges and prosecutors or the ministries of justice or interior or whoever might else hold authority there. But also around the resistance within the public health sector. And that's an example that I'll never forget, the story from the LEAD program in Seattle, King County, where one of the initial problems was just getting the caseworkers and health workers to show up at 2 a.m. Initially and have that kind of that change in practice and in relationship as well, but also around resistance in community. So some of these themes we're going to pick up on, and I'm going to ask, in a bit, I want to get to some positives and successes and surprises, but since we're in the challenge part of the conversation, I want to turn to you, Hai, because while this intersection of law enforcement and harm reduction has a long history in different parts of the world, its uptake in various jurisdictions is varied, with it still being relatively new in some places. And you mentioned in your opening remarks about in Vietnam that it's still relatively new. In 2009, it really started emerging, but that is still, it's still new and in development in Vietnam. So I'm curious to hear from you, and in what ways have you seen, what have you seen as the key obstacles in the way of making this harm reduction approach in policing really emerge?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Yes, I would like to follow up with Jana's explanation regarding to the idea decriminalization somewhere is very weird. I also can confirm is decriminalization drug use in Vietnam is half-half. I use term is a sandwich 50-50, because even though we in the law, in the criminal law in the Vietnam 2009, decriminalize drug use Article 199, but they still push in the CDC as a compulsory detention center. It's at the maximum with 2 years, and yeah, that's why I want to wrap up at least it's four challenges, 4 key challenges and obstacles when the Vietnam moving on is the harm reduction, particularly with the policy, because we are focusing on this topic now. I think firstly is ideology. Yeah, in the Vietnam, as you may know, it's we still follow is one communist party leading. They force everything, of course, including with the military and policing, public security. Everything is put in underground, which supervising as in the Communist Party. It's in the Vietnam, to come back with the 2 decades. I mean the 2000s, when the first time the first law on anti-narcotics passed, and also Vietnam with the pandemic, the HIV, particularly with the high rate of the people who use drugs spreading out all 63 provinces. And however, unfortunately, the ideologies for the policing, they always deal with the people as the criminal, rather than is the pattern. Until the 2009, when we changed the law and decriminalize, withdraw drug use in criminal code, and they are the pattern. But in my 2 recent articles in the International Journal of Drug Policy and also journals of Well-being and Safety, just only conducted interviews around 30 police officer, not too much. I think it's small scale. We will come back. It's a scale question later, but some of them sharing, they quite hesitate, and some of them they admit that they misunderstood what is the harm reduction and what's going on when the Vietnam decriminalizing drug use 2009. And in fact, after 5 years, I mean, since 2009 and 2015, even though the Australian government support Vietnam with quite big, I think it's 3 years, 2009 and 2012, 3 years for harm reduction for policies. I think it's the first one in the Southeast Asia. It's a quite interesting topic, and they also achieve some advantage and positive results. For example, they run some MMT, methadone magic treatment for some pilots, not too much in Hanoi, its capital. But unfortunately, after 10 years until now, even though every 2 years, Vietnam send the high-ranking senior police ranking involved or law enforcement and public health conference. For example, 2 years ago in Edinburgh, but 4 years in the Amsterdam and Melbourne, etc. But no any change. I mean, come back to the first challenge is ideologies. Even though they join, and even though the Vietnam signed in the Amsterdam Declaration on Partnership with Harm Reduction 2014, and now nearly 10 years on decade, but nothing changed. And the secondly, obstacle, it's I think it's collaboration. Yeah, we quite jealous with the Brandons or Jason in the UK and US when among a police officer, and their partnership is quite strong and collaborate very smoothly. But unfortunately, in the Vietnam with the drug policy, because as you may know, supply reduction. I still the first priority. And second one is the demand reduction. Harm reduction, as I kick off, is the open remark. It's a very new one. Even though 4 years ago, when it's a national strategy plan with 10 years, the leadership in the Communist Party declared officially Vietnam want to balancing between triangle points: supply reduction, demand reduction, and harm reduction. But in fact, they still, because I just finished my consultant position with the international harm reduction, which report regarding to expenditure, law enforcement in drug policy. Hopefully, there is a public soon this year. I collect the data. Unfortunately, COVID-19 cannot come back by face-to-face interview, but secondary data and government reports show that Vietnam still high waiver than for the supply reduction anyway. And just the third one, I think it is a trust. Both ways, police and drug use, among there is still conflict, not really trusting between the drug use with the police officer. As I mentioned before, the police, almost my college in practitioner, they still underlies with criminal rather than is a patient. And the last but not least is, I think, is technical skills. Almost police officer, because I spent over 20 years in police academy in Hanoi. I know that, even though 1997 the first faculty counter narcotics established, not too much time, with 20 years, but now I need unit to training for harm reduction with the police officer, particularly with the frontline officer. They don't know exactly. Maybe perhaps only teach them or training them how can they protect themselves when deal with the drug use, something like that. Nothing more, nothing less. Yes, that's why I think it is for the main key challenges: trust, ideologies, collaboration, and technical skill. Particularly, technical skill is one weakness we need to improve. I will share later. It's one is initiative we learned from LIT model from Brandon or Philadelphia or the somewhere in the US, but not police follow from the civil society organization, SCDI by Dr. Wang Quất. Very unlucky. No anybody from the SCDI supporting Central Development and Initiative. It's really, really impressive CSOs in Hanoi. Because 2 years ago when we attended the conference in Edinburgh, they came, but I didn't see anyone in Vietnam involved in the virtual meeting this year. Yeah, we run it 2 years, 2019, and now finish the first step, 2 years. Unfortunately, I can't come back now to make conducted and interviews directly with the 2 police in Hanoi. They follow the LIT model in the US, but from them they share some very positive points. Most of local police now recognize, because some of them admit that they're very tired, because compared to drug trafficking now, as you may know, Vietnam's close border with the Golden Triangle. A lot of my articles I point out, Vietnam now is become a transnational hub, not only destination or not only transit. Definitely it's a transnational hub. That's why they say very tired. Now they some of the local police, they very interesting involve LIT model and they happy. Currently we are Hanoi pilot in the 2 districts with around three awards. Hopefully, maybe next year, we will release the findings.
Thank you very much. And I have followed loosely from afar some of the exchanges that colleagues from the Lead Support Bureau, they call themselves the Lead National Support Bureau, but I call them the Lead Support Bureau because their work is global and international. So I'm urging Brendan, Naja, I see you out there. I'm urging a name change. But have been following that work with Dr. Wan as well in SCDI, and it is promising, but slow as this work goes. And thank you for raising these 4 points around ideology and collaboration, trust, and technical skills. We're a bit of halfway through our time, and I know we've talked on the challenges, but I want to talk a little bit on success and positive surprises. Jason, as we mentioned, you're in your last year. I don't mean this question for you to have to sum up your entire policing career, but wondering if maybe there's like a particular success that stands out for you, or something that you would like to share from your work trying to bridge this harm reduction in law enforcement.
Yeah, thank you. I'll describe the Thames Valley drug diversion scheme. So for adults and young people, we no longer arrest people for simple possession of controlled drugs. That's any drug. And for young people, that means we no longer have to arrest, interview, or even require an admission of guilt. And that's quite significant because the officer finding the young person in possession of drugs now can alter the conversation to be a lot more engaging, trauma-informed about the actual facts around possession. And that enables obviously a different reaction on the street between the young person and the officer, but also that rapidly as possible turns that incriminating encounter into a positive health outcome from the outset. So how that happens is the officer then applies what's called a community resolution. And that community resolution is the lowest outcome, legal outcome, if you like, within the justice system within the UK. And it leaves no criminal footprint on someone's record either. So this is as close to decriminalisation, I guess, that you can possibly get within the UK at the moment, within the legal framework. But its kind of surprise really is its simplicity. So there's, as I mentioned, no arrest, no interview, no admission of guilt required. We ask the person whether they want to have an assessment about what they've been found with by a drugs expert. And this is coming back to the previous point we made about the police aren't the experts here, but we want the drug service expert to help that person assess what they're using, and then tailor an educational piece around what that possession of drugs looks like. Now, that isn't just about the drugs they've been found with, because we often find someone in possession of cannabis, but actually what they're using in a more risky way is the ketamine at the weekend. And the drug service then can tailor the harm reduction input for that young person there, throughout the course. And this is a voluntary course; they don't have to attend. So where we trialed this scheme, it was a 6-week course of 1-hour sessions, and we thought that was actually very arduous, far more arduous, in fact, than the previous outcome, if you like, through a conditional caution or a criminal outcome that they would have previously received. And young people actually want to attend, and we have 88% of all young people diverted through the scheme completing the entire course purely through choice. And that's outstanding, because the real surprise is that it's the power of choice. When you give someone a choice and empower them to make the decision to learn something and reduce their own risks around what they're using, positively change their own behavior, it's extremely powerful. And the real surprise here is that over half of those people completing this 6-week course want to stay on beyond. So once the mandated, if you like, course is finished, they want to stay on because they're learning more about sexual health, domestic abuse, healthier choices, how to get out of escalating social media feuds to reduce serious violence, and so on and so on. And I think the other surprise for me is how versatile something so simple actually is to implement in other with other stakeholders. So we have issues around school exclusion. So when a student is found in possession of drugs in the school system, we've now enabled the school system to use our diversion scheme. So the schools now can adopt the same model without the need for police, and that precludes any exclusion. So the child is now dealt with in the educational setting for the possession of drugs. So we've turned possession of drugs not only into a health outcome, but now an educational one too. So that reduces exclusions. But I think for me, really, the big surprise is that this is politically acceptable. You know, this is a meaningful outcome, a meaningful way to deal with what is essentially a health issue, but it's not controversial. It's not going soft. It's not appearing to go soft, if you like, for some hard aligned politics, but actually this is a very comprehensive way to deal with a very complex issue. So it works. And I think that's the big surprise for me.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Jason. And I liked, I mean, even in the example that you played out in terms of the complexity of the system, but how, you know, that this is not a controversial approach, but just how, in your example, drugs and our approach, how it touches on so many different aspects. You know, it's not just around policing and public safety, it's also around health, but also schools, right? Where, as you mentioned, and young people's ability to stay in school, around jobs and income, housing.
Yeah, police can play a very valuable and unique gateway, if you like. We have the application of the law, but we are merely gatekeepers to a diversion and intervention. And we just need to think wider about what else we can include into that.
Now, we identified a few other topics. We'll see if we have time for them around links to broader police reform, scale, international transferability, decrim, of course. So I want to go to and I think this links nicely with the points you were making in the example, Jason, around how harm reduction, whether it's a program like the one you're talking about, or maybe something like LEAD, Brendan, you've been working on, or even something smaller like a syringe service program, how harm reduction can kind of be Jason, you mentioned police could be a gateway to other services, but how harm reduction can be a gateway to broader transformation and reform within the police. Brendan, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, you know, I look at harm reduction and the philosophy behind it much like community policing. And, you know everybody says they do community policing, and I know community policing gets both rave reviews and beat up a lot. And it gets beat up a lot because folks look at community policing and implement programs and say that's what they're doing, rather than actually having a philosophy and using it as a strategy and making sure that they're going by that philosophy as they're implementing their strategy. And I look at harm reduction as that. Like, if we look at respect and dignity, if we look at a person-centered approach, if we look at relationship building, if we look at bringing everybody to the table, if we look at meeting people where they're at and not leaving them there, if we look at just recognizing that everybody's got the right to view things from where they do, and that we need to respect that, we can build out a different way of policing. We can build out a way to actually have the reforms that are needed. I mean, it's not a bad thing that we need reforms. It's the truth, but it's also a truth that the other systems need reform. So I think that when we come from this harm reduction world, and I think when we build those relationships, we can then also bring those other folks to the table and also have them see our side of things from the law enforcement side. And I think we've had successes that way, to be able to come to the table and say, like, hey, remember, we have this person-centered approach. We are seeing people with respect and dignity. We're recognizing that there's gaps in the system. And if we change some of the systems around, and if we're able to do things in a different way, like actually like open our shelters and not have strict rules around, if somebody got kicked out a year ago because they misbehaved, that they can no longer come into that shelter, that we actually can get them back in. But I think from a philosophical standpoint, which is difficult for a lot of people, because, philosophy is not necessarily concrete, but if we can go by a certain guidance, we can build strategies around that. We can make sure we include people with lived experience to actually be at the table and have a say and help direct what we're doing. It goes back to the expert piece. Like there's certain things we just don't have the expertise at. There's other things we do. I mean, there's things we do really well in law enforcement that, yes, we're the ones that can help steer that. But that doesn't mean we can't bring other folks in and get their say. So I think the key components of harm reduction can lead us to a better way of doing things. It can bring us to a place of getting away from, you know, I say punishment and coercion and getting away from those a lot, because when we look at, especially in the context of the United States, you know, we look at the fact that, you know, we're 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's incarcerated population. And if we learned anything from COVID, we can remove people from jail and we can do it safely. And I know there's going to be people that will push back, because this last year we've had challenges. We've had gun violence, we've had domestic violence, we've had those increases. But I think we can still build strategies to address those. I mean, look at gun violence. Like we've only touched, to me in harm reduction, we've only touched the very base of what we can get to. You know, think about trauma. You know, I look at my own community in Albany. We identified the people that were most likely to shoot somebody. They were also the most likely to be shot. So we did outreach with other community members that had a stake in the community to see what it was we could help provide folks, especially when they were young adults, to keep them away from not only shooting somebody, but being a victim themselves. So we can make a harm reduction philosophy around the strategy of public safety, especially because it brings us to that public health view. Public health is something that we know that our communities that we wind up in many times to address issues can bring us to a different place, because at the end of the day, enforcement doesn't get us where we need to be. You know, an arrest plus a prosecution plus incarceration does not equal public safety. There are people that, yes, are extremely violent, that create issues that we do need to get off the street. But there are so many other problems. You know, in law enforcement, 90% of the things we deal with are not criminal activities. So if we bring that harm reduction public health approach to the table, and we use that philosophy, you know, I think we can ultimately satisfy many of the things we need to satisfy, especially engaging our community and meeting them where they are, and recognizing that it's okay to be challenged by folks, and it's okay to get their ideas on the table and figure out a way to meet them there.
Thank you, Brendan. There's a lot I want to pick. I'm so tempted to pick up on pieces that you mentioned there. And I got the flag from our colleague Sarah, who's supporting this session, that we have 20 minutes left. So also want to give a reminder to folks in the audience, if you do have questions or input you would like to share, to just drop it in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll try to bring it on board here. But with the time, I want to kind of combine this question that I asked with another one for you, Janat, you know, around harm reduction as a tool for broader police reform, but also this question around international transferability. We're at an international conference. You know, each of us have been involved as well, not just at a local level, but international technical assistance and exchange as well around harm reduction and policing. Janat, you could take up the police reform question you want, if you would like, or take up the question around how well do you think these concepts and ideas transfer across different jurisdictions in contexts internationally?
Yes, thank you very much. And I like this, which Jason just mentioned about just gatekeepers, that was followed by Brendan. Yes, let me go again to these capacity building activities, which resulted in some countries in a very good sort of changes in operational procedures. For example, these diversion schemes, it comes just directly from this capacity building exercise, which we've done with law enforcement, including civil society people. The development of this internal policy and the development of instruction and rules for policemen, changing the performance indicators in some countries really brings to change in the internal policy of police. It doesn't go probably beyond the whole this Ministry of Internal Affairs reform, but still it started with some part of this law enforcement sectors. We're still missing probably the involvement, much involvement of justice section, but it will be sort of, I think, our next step. But what I would like to say, all these topics which comes up with from different angles about this meaningful partnership of different sections, particularly with law enforcement, including justice, prosecutors, judges, and everything, it's on the top priority, I think, in the UNAIDS agenda. Because within this development of the new agenda, we were leading this focus group discussion where we put all together law enforcement, civil society, and justice, and they developed their recommendation where they clearly put in there that this leaving no one behind also refers or targeting actually justice section and law enforcement. They also should not be leaving behind or from the developing of the programs and strategies which related to harm reduction issues, because we understand their role, but probably we should bring them there with us and discuss from the ground all these issues in addition to our capacity building events. Besides that, all these international discussions which we have now, I think these topics should be addressed at the regular basis to ensure the right level of awareness and understanding of the necessity of this partnership. And this is particularly important, and I really think I would like to thank this public law enforcement and public health center for organizing this on a regular basis, and also you, Mark, because you always put very high the flag of this cooperation and the necessity of working together. Within this, actually in line with this approach, I think UNODC this year, we are launching the campaign of fostering partnership between law enforcement and civil society in this harm reduction approach, including all key population, including all these issues related to decriminalization and the human rights approach. So this is very important. Yeah, as I said, it should be regularly addressed and be put on the sort of high level of understanding and awareness.
Thank you, Jana. And since you invoked decriminalization again, and I promised that we'd get to it, let's get to it. I'm curious, how you all see the relationship between harm reduction and decriminalization. You know, can one take place without the other? Or even, you know, pushing beyond that, you know, we're seeing the push now to decriminalize possession of small amounts of drugs for personal use in different countries, even legalization of cannabis in some countries. But in terms of decriminalization, what we're not seeing is giving people access to a safe supply of drugs. And this seems to be leaving this gap perhaps around street violence that surrounds drug dealing or the quality of the drug market itself. So it's an open question around, can we have one without the other? Where do you see, you know, harm reduction, decriminalization, legalization, and regulation?
Let us stop on decriminalization and harm reduction, right? I don't want to go further because, as you know, you see the three conventions, and there is no changes in this approach. And despite the latest development at CND 2021 this year, still, we are not talking about legalization, but decriminalization and harm reduction is very much interconnected with each other. But I also wanted to say that decriminalization should go alone, and along with the alternative to incarceration. And this alternative incarceration have a variety of opportunities, including harm reduction issues. And harm reduction issues is a basis for everything, because all alternatives could be considered as a harm reduction approach. And in fact, it is harm reduction approach, because we keep people sort of aside of these criminal sanctions. That's the main issue, and supporting them and referring them to other services, life-saving services. And I think this is very much, I would say, interlinked and basis for each other, and interconnected issue. And our organization is doing with this. And in fact, when we're talking decriminalization, it's not about only drug possession and drug consumption. It's also about decriminalization of behavior of all representative of key population group. It goes beyond only drug use, drug-related issues, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Jana. I wanted to just say quickly on that point, because I have seen in Mexico, for instance, or in parts of Kenya, but Mexico, where they've decriminalized small amounts, people who inject drugs and are homeless are then being arrested for vagrancy or loitering or another offense, right? So it's kind of that whack-a-mole game that we have in the US. Brendan or Jason or Hai, who wants to come in? Brendan?
Yeah, so I know my old colleagues would say that he's finally lost his mind, and that's okay. So I mean, yeah, decrim and harm reduction, they can certainly work together, and I think, you know, in state of Washington, I think the model they're rolling out, I think they will. But you know, I mean, I just don't think decrim goes far enough. And again, I mean, I haven't always felt this way, and I'm not advocating that everybody should just go use all the drugs out in the world there are, but you know, we're not recognizing in decrim is that we're not recognizing that we're not giving folks a way to get a safe supply of drugs. So we're not going to reduce overdoses. We're not going to take fentanyl out of the market, and we're not going to stop street violence. We're going to continue to make folks buy at places that violence is going to surround that, because we're continuing to keep street level drug dealing. So we're going to continue to keep violence in our cities and towns and villages. We're going to continue to frustrate the police, because it's not going to solve a lot of the issues in policing. Whereas legalization and regulating will start to address the supply chain, start to address what's in drugs. It will get more of a public health approach. And although it's not a panacea, and although it won't stop all the street violence right away, because that's true, it's not going to completely do away with the illicit market right away. Legalizing cannabis is not completely done away with the illicit market, because of course we're going to tax everything like we do in the United States. But it's, you know, I think we have to be a little bit more radical, I guess. I'll call it radical. I don't think it's that radical, but you know, I think we need to go further. I just, you know, again, people ask me this all the time. They're like, well, what do you tell your kids? Well, my two kids are now almost adults. I don't consider 23 and 20 adults, although at 23 I carried a badge. That doesn't mean I want them to go use heroin or cocaine or even cannabis. I talk to them about the dangers of using drugs, but I also don't want them to drink or smoke cigarettes. So I tell them the same dangers of those. But at the end of the day, if we're just decriminalizing small amounts of these drugs, and we're not giving folks that safe supply of a drug, and if we're continuing to exacerbate the problems that we have in our cities, then what are we truly accomplishing? You know, we need to think the rest of this out. Because at the end of the day, all the naysayers are going to be pointing at things and say, see, we told you decriminalization was a bad move, because we still have these problems. We're still having overdoses, people are still dying, and we still have violence. And we can actually address those through regulation.
Thanks, Brendan. Go ahead, Jason. I see you coming in.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a subject really close to my heart. So yeah, decriminalization will, you know, go a long way to redressing the social inequality, I think. And you know, it's around the Chicago school theory of policing, isn't it, as well? You know, we police the areas of highest visible demand, and it's those people living within those highly populated areas that get incarcerated the most. The wealthy, who live in a very disparate, more spaced out area, no pun intended there, they don't get touched by the police because they're not policed. And it's this disparate, you know, disparity of over policing in different communities, and those who live in more densely, more impoverished areas get over criminalized. So decriminalization will go some way to addressing that. And I think areas such in the US need to be applauded. You know, the Massachusetts cannabis policy and social equity program, goes a long way to redressing a lot of the harm done through years of prohibition, and that's to be applauded and to be investigated, and it's something that works. So, but going on to legalization or regulation, we in the UK we're lucky because we have opiate substitutes, so methadone, buprenorphine, Buvidal, and even diamorphine. There's an evidence base from the UK riot trials, in fact, and there's a current a study going on in Glasgow and also Middlesbrough in Cleveland, where if you hear me out here, so the top 10% heaviest heroin using group consume 30 to 66% of all the illicit heroin. So the very small number at the top, the heaviest users, consume the vast majority of the illicit heroin. Now the majority of those at the moment are disengaged, if you like, from any traditional treatments such as opiate substitute of methadone, buprenorphine, because their resilience or the program isn't enough to deal with their need. That's a very idealistic summary there. I have to admit, I'm not an expert here, but injectable diamorphine can redress that significantly, and that's where diamorphine is prescribed as part of that medication treatment program, and that is a form of regulated heroin, and the results are startling. So in Middlesbrough, in just the first 3 months, there were 887 crimes recorded between just 14 people on the scheme. Now that 14 people, they were committing the most of the acquisitive crime and also consuming the most of illicit heroin. Within 3 months, those 887 crimes evaporated down to just 10 crimes in 3 months. And as a police officer, as one of my primary duties to reduce demand, to reduce crime, then what better way is there than actually, looking at more, more openly towards a regulated system, and heroin supply is a part of that. So whilst all the world's attention is drawn towards cannabis supply and cannabis legalization and cannabis regulation, yes, that will do significant good, I guess. In the Canadian model, we're seeing some real progress there, particularly reducing the harmful THC available in the illicit young persons market, because obviously young people won't be able to go and purchase a drug legally, but heroin should be given priority too, and that's an absolute game changer in my view. So reduction in crime, but also a reduction in other health outcomes too. So that's me. I could speak all day long, but I've just seen the 5-minute warning.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. And yeah, so we have 5 minutes left. Want to give a time for us just to all say a quick goodbye, but before doing that, Hai, I want to give you the chance to come in on this question.
Yes, very quickly, because in Vietnam, as I mentioned before, we quite viewed and very paradoxically, even though there's a decriminalization drug use, but if not change, maybe it's next month, when the National Assembly they declares and they pass the new law on anti-narcotics, they again legalization drug use, unfortunately. That's why one of the 4 challenges in Vietnam is ideologies. It's just top down. For example, Minister of the Ministry of Public Security, they show all evidence now drug use boom, and they link some of the clear evidence between the drug-related crimes and the other crimes. Therefore, they urge the rest of the ministries to push again with the reenact drug use. If not change, maybe next month there is a regulate again with the new one, legalize again drug use. Unfortunately, that's why I want to add, last but not least, in the Vietnam still fail if they not the same. I totally agree with Janet. If not if they still mismatch between the harm reduction and decriminalization drug use, they will fail. Absolutely. Unfortunately, in the Vietnam, no any the officer data or research publication after 10 years, Vietnam decriminalizing the drug use. Is that even though they want to show evidence base, but they just only the ideologies and they persuade the top downs, not grassroots. Therefore, I quite scared the harm reduction in policing in the Vietnam still not change. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Hai, and thank you all for taking on such a thorny question as well. We've gone through most, and I think I wanted to just say on this point, one thing I really appreciate from some people who thought on this, like Cassandra Frederic at Drug Policy Alliance, for instance, in the US, talks about harm reduction as harm reduction. It's not just about the drug use, but also about drug policy, and that's the harm that we're trying to reduce as well. We have 70 seconds left before we might be just cut off. So just want to give a quick word, if everybody just wants to just say thank you. Well, thank you to the audience for being here, for joining us during this time. Thank you all to our panelists, Jason, Brendan, Hai, Janat, for joining. Thank you for Sarah for helping with the logistics and facilitating this. Final word, we'll just go around. We'll go Jason, Brendan, Hai, Janat.
Yeah, just thank you for me. Just have the confidence to create change, because you are the change. Support and definitely not punish.
Yeah, for me, I'm not on behalf of Vietnamese police, but I hopefully the same Mark said is harm reduction is drug policy. Hopefully in the reality in the Vietnam. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. You guys are a great panel to be on with. Humbling to be on with you guys.
And the huge thanks from my side as well. And we do need your experience, Jason and Brandon and Hai. So as I said, we will be working closely on this topic from your ODC side, and Mark as well. Yeah, we need your experience as well. Yeah, sure. And we will be collaborating, I'm sure, in different events. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you all again for everyone for joining us. Thank you, panelists, for this fantastic conversation, and more so for your work and vision in this work. Enjoy your Thursday and the rest of the conference.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.